The engine explosion tore through the silence of space like a scream. Red warning lights flooded every corner of the survey ship Meridian, and the smell of burning circuits filled the air. Ryan Lawson grabbed the nearest handhold as the deck lurched beneath his feet, his knuckles white against the metal rail. Hull breach in engineering, atmospheric processors failing, navigation offline. Pilot Rook's crystalline voice crackled through the intercom. The graphics usual calm had fractured into something sharper. Captain, we need ground now. Captain Nara's chitinous fingers danced across her console, her compound eyes reflecting the chaos of failing systems. The Valasian's antennae twitched with stress as she pulled up star charts. Typhon system, 7 planets, only one with minimal atmosphere. Typhon 7, Dr. Hollies croaked from his station, his amphibian skin turning a sickly gray. That's a Class 4 death. World. Ryan moved toward the viewport as the planet swelled into view. Angry purple clouds churned across a surface that seemed to writhe with movement. Lightning arced between storm systems that could swallow continents, even from orbit. The world below looked hungry. Death world or dead crew, Nara said, her mandibles clicking. Rook, take us down. The descent turned violent with seconds. Typhon 7 gravity grabbed the Meridian and pulled hard. Ryan strapped himself into a crash seat while the alien crew members struggled with harnesses designed for their different physiologies. The ship bucked and twisted, metal groaning under stress it was never meant to handle. They hit hard. The impact drove Ryan forward against his restraints, and something in the cargo bay exploded with a dull thump, then silence, broken only by the hiss of escaping atmosphere and the tick of cooling metal. Ryan released his harness and stood testing his legs. Gravity felt heavy, like wearing a weighted vest during training. Around him, the alien crew member struggled to move. Nara pulled herself upright with visible effort. Hollies remained slumped in his seat, breathing hard. Rook's crystalline structure had developed new stress fractures. Damage report, Nara managed. Rook's voice came thin and strained. Primary engines destroyed, atmospheric processors damaged, hull integrity at 60%. We need external repairs to survive. 4 days here, maybe 5 if we ration air. Through the viewport, Ryan could see Typhon 7 in all its terrible glory. The landing had gouged a scar through what looked like jungle, but the vegetation was already moving back toward the ship. Things with too many legs skittered through the undergrowth. Something that might have been a tree pulsed with bioluminescent veins. We should seal the ship, Holly said, his voice shaking. Remain inside. Use emergency protocols. Ryan pulled up the external sensor feed. On a working console, temperature readings fluctuated wildly. The atmosphere contained oxygen, but also compounds that would burn most species. Lungs, the local life signs painted a picture of an ecosystem built on violence and adaptation. Gravity measured at 1.8 times Federation standard. We can't repair the engines from inside, Ryan said quietly. Someone needs to establish an external work zone. The crew turned to stare at him like he had suggested swimming in acid. Nothing survives outside on death world. Nara said the protocols exist for a reason. Ryan studied the data more carefully. Predator patterns, plant toxicity levels, atmospheric composition, seismic activity zones. 2. The others, it read like a recipe for Disaster, to him it looked like. Variables he could work with, Earth. Scores 3.7 on the Death World scale, he said looking up from the console. This is rated 4.2, marginally worse than home. He started pulling up his expedition gear from the supply locker. I'll do a preliminary survey, figure out where we can set up the repair station. You want to go outside? Holly's had turned completely gray now out there. Ryan checked his gear methodically. Standard atmospheric mask, not a full environmental suit, tool belt, scanner, sample containers, emergency beacon. He caught NRA watching him with all her eyes. Captain, I need to know which direction has the best terrain for a work zone, he said. North, south, east, or west? Nara's antenna quivered. You're serious? We need repairs. Repairs need workspace. Workspace needs setup. Ryan pulled on his jacket. This gravity is heavy but manageable. Atmosphere needs filtering, but it's breathable with equipment. The local life will be territorial but predictable. He moved toward the airlock. I'll be back in 30 minutes with options. The crew watched through internal cameras as Ryan cycled the airlock. The outer door opened onto Typhon 7, and a blast of hot chemical tainted rolled into the chamber. Ryan stepped through without hesitation. The world beyond tried to kill him. Immediately, thick humidity wrapped around him like a fist. The gravity dragged at his bones. Something that looked like moss released spores that sparked against his jacket. Ryan ignored it all, his boots squashing in mud that hissed with microbial activity. He walked 20 m from the ship before stopping to take readings. The scanner in his hand painted a picture of his surroundings in data and probability. Behind him, through the meridians viewport, 3 alien faces watched in stunned silence as the human moved through their nightmare like it was a nature walk. A plant tendril thick as his arm and lined with thorns extended toward him slowly. Ryan observed it for 3 seconds, noted the pattern of movement, then simply stepped aside. Tendril quested through empty air before withdrawing. Territorial defense not active. Hunting, he muttered, logging the observation, response to vibration and heat signature for the next 27 minutes. Ryan mapped the area around the crashed ship. He collected soil samples that bubbled in their containers. He recorded the calls of things hunting the jungle canopy. He marked safe paths and dangerous zones. When something with 6 legs and too many teeth approached, he stood still until it lost interest and moved on. He returned to the airlock exactly 30 minutes after leaving, his boots covered in alien mud and his jacket dotted with acid burns that hadn't quite penetrated the fabric. Crew met him in the cargo bay, staring like he had returned from the dead. Ryan pulled off his atmospheric mask and smiled. Found 3 good locations for the repair station. North site has the best terrain, but more seismic activity. East has stable ground, but the local predators use it as a hunting path. South has both stability and lower traffic. He pulled out his scanner and uploaded the data. I recommend south. We can set up camp there and start work tomorrow. In the heavy silence that followed, Nara's mandibles clicked. Softly, you said camp. The repairs will take days, Ryan said simply. We'll need a base of operations outside the ship. He looked at their shocked faces and shrugged. It's not that bad out there. Trust me, I grew up in worse. Dawn on. Typhon 7 arrived with screaming Something in the distant jungle made sounds that hurt to hear, like metal. Tearing slowly underwater, Ryan stood outside the ship, already dressed in, working while the 3 alien crew members watch from the safety of the airlock. He's been out there for 2 hours, Hollis whispered, his throat sac pulsing with anxiety, just building. Things. Nero watched through the external cameras as Ryan marked territory in a wide circle around the southern landing site. He moved with purpose, placing sensors that hummed softly when activated. Each device created an invisible boundary, mapping the movements of everything larger than a fist within 50 meters. What are those? Rook asked, his crystalline voice carrying curiosity despite the fear. Motion detectors, Ryan's voice crackled through the calm. Same kind Rangers use on Earth for tracking grizzlies and wolves. The local predators are territorial. If I know where they patrol, we know where not to build. As they watched, a pack of creatures emerged from the undergrowth. 6 legs each, scaled bodies low to the ground, heads that split open into 3-part jaws. They moved in formation, coordinated and silent. Apex predators by any definition. The crew held their breath as the pack approached the perimeter. Ryan stood perfectly still, watching them over his shoulder while continuing to work on a support frame. The lead predator reached the invisible line marked by his sensors and stopped. Its head swept side to side, scenting the air. Then it turned away, leading its pack along a parallel path that avoided Ryan's marked territory entirely. They respected the boundary. Near a breath out, Ryan's voice came back. Calm. Sound deterrence in the sensors. Frequency makes them uncomfortable, like a warning sign. They're smart enough to recognize claimed territory and efficient enough not to fight for it when other hunting grounds exist. He hammered another support beam into place. Everything out here is conserving energy. No wasted movement means better survival. By midday, Ryan had cleared a space 15 m across using controlled burns that turned the aggressive flora into ash without spreading to the surrounding jungle. The fire seemed to speak a language the plants understood. They pulled back from the heat, their bioluminescent veins dimming as they retreated. Hollis found his courage first, cycling through the airlock to join Ryan in the cleared zone. The gravity hit him like a physical blow, driving him to his knees. Ryan caught him before he fell completely, supporting the amphibians. Wait until Hollis found his balance. Breathe slow, Ryan said. Let your body adjust to the pressure. Don't fight it. How are you standing normally? Hollis gasped. Ryan shrugged, continuing to work while Hollis caught his breath. Spent my childhood in Alaska, young adult. Years in Colorado mountains, trained high-gravity environments for this job. He hefted a metal beam that Hollis could never have lifted. Besides, my bones are denser than yours, human. Evolution on a death world builds different. By evening, the camp had taken shape. Ryan had constructed a shelter using debris from the ships, damaged exterior panels and materials scavenged from the local environment. The frame stood solid despite the wind that howled through the jungle. Atmospheric processors hummed in the corners, creating a bubble of breathable air that didn't require masks. Power generators converted local chemical compounds into electricity. Lights pushed back the darkness that fell like a curtain across Typhon 7, and in the center of it all, Ryan had built a workshop space large enough for the 3 aliens to repair the engine core, without crushing themselves under the planet's gravity. Nera ventured out as the second sun dipped below the horizon. She moved carefully in the heavy gravity, her legs trembling with effort. Ryan had set up a path of handholds and support rails that made movement possible for non-human physiology. "This is remarkable," she said, her antenna sweeping across the camp. "You built all this in one day, had good materials and clear objectives." Ryan said he was setting up what looked like a cooking station using the ship's portable rations. The hard part was understanding the ecosystem well enough not to provoke it. As if summoned by his words, something massive moved through the jungle beyond the lights. Trees bent and snapped. The ground transmitted vibrations that Nera could feel through her feet. She froze, every instinct screaming to flee back to the ship. Ryan continued preparing food, not even looking up. "Aren't you concerned about that?" Nera managed. "Territorial display," Ryan said calmly. "Something big claiming its hunting ground. We're not in its territory, and we haven't challenged its dominance, so it has no reason to engage." He finally looked up at the darkness where trees still swayed, probably something like an elephant, massive, powerful, but herbivorous and non-aggressive and less threatened. The sounds faded as whatever it was moved deeper into the jungle. Nera sat down carefully on a bench Ryan had constructed. "On my world, the most dangerous animal is a tree climber. Barely larger than my hand. It is mild venom." She watched Ryan work. "I cannot imagine evolving on a world where things like that exist." "Earth has worse," Ryan said simply. "Polar bears that weigh 700 kilos and see humans as food. Saltwater crocodiles that can bite through bone. Box jellyfish whose sting kills in minutes. Hippos that kill more humans per year than any other large animal." He activated the heating element under his food. "You learn to read behavior patterns, respect territory, understand that most animals don't want conflict any more than you do." Rook emerged from the ship, moving slowly in the gravity. "Why don't you carry weapons?" the Gravik asked. "Surely plasma rifles would be safer." Ryan considered this while stirring his meal. "Weapons create escalation. You shoot at something its pack or herd remembers, they adapt. Suddenly, you're in an arms race with the local ecology." He gestured at the peaceful camp, lit and humming with activity. "This way, we're just another species in the ecosystem. Not prey, not predator, just neighbors passing through." Night on Typhon 7 brought new sounds. Things howled and chirped and sang in frequencies that made Nera's antenna ache. But inside Ryan's camp, the 3 aliens found themselves relaxing. The human had built safety out of understanding rather than force. "Tomorrow we start repairs," Ryan said, handing out portions of heated rations. "Rook, you'll handle the precision calibrations. Hollies, you'll manage the diagnostic equipment. Captain, you'll coordinate between stations." He settled onto a bench with his own meal. "I'll do the heavy lifting and external work, and if something goes wrong," Hollies asked quietly. Ryan smiled. "Then we adapt, same as everything else on this planet has been doing for millions of years." He looked out at the jungle where eyes reflected the camp lights from the darkness. "We're guests here. As long as we remember that, we'll be fine." The crew ate in silence, watching their human companion treat the nightmare world around them like it was simply another job site. Above them, Typhon's 73 moons rose through the purple clouds, casting strange shadows across a camp that should not have existed, but it did exist, built by human hands in a single day, proving that death worlds were only nightmares if you didn't know how to read them. The damaged engine core sat in the center of the workshop like a dying heart. Rook circled it slowly, his crystalline fingers tracing the fractured conduits while muttering calculations in his native language. Holly's monitored readouts from a diagnostic station Ryan had assembled during the night. Nara coordinated the repair schedule from a chair that kept her off her struggling legs. Ryan worked the heavy machinery without complaint. The gravity that exhausted the others in minutes became just another factor he compensated for with technique and pacing. When a damaged panel needed removal, he applied leverage instead of brute force. When components needed repositioning, he used simple machines he had built from scrap. The containment field generator is completely fused, Rook announced, frustration crystallizing in his voice. We need to separate it from the housing, but it weighs 200 kilos in this gravity. That's like moving 360. Ryan set down the wrench he had been using and approached the component. He studied it from multiple angles, then disappeared into the jungle. The crew watched nervously as he vanished into the undergrowth. He returned 15 minutes later, dragging a fallen tree trunk stripped of branches. The wood looked dense and heavy, dark purple with veins of something that might have been mineral deposits. Local ironwood equivalent, Ryan explained, setting up a lever system using the trunk and strategically placed fulcrums. Stronger than steel grows in the high-gravity zones where nothing else survives. He positioned the lever under the fused component and braced it. Physics works the same everywhere. Give me a place to stand and I can move worlds. He pulled down on the lever. The containment field generator lifted smoothly from its housing, rotating on the fulcrum until it settled exactly where Rook needed it. The graphics stared at the simple machine like it was magic. How did you know that would support the weight? Holly's asked. Ryan tapped the trunk. Density testing. Stress fracture analysis. Same way you test any material. He smiled slightly. Plus, I noticed those big herbivores eating similar trees. Anything that feeds a creature built for this gravity has to be structurally robust. The work continued through the morning. Problems arose with predictable regularity. Acid rain began falling around noon, the droplets hissing where they struck metal. The crew scrambled to cover the sensitive equipment, but Ryan had already deployed collapsible shields that redirected the rain away from the workspace. The camp's design included drainage channels that carried the acidic water into collection points, where it pulled harmlessly. You planned for this, Nara observed, watching the rain flow along Ryan's carefully graded pathways. Weather patterns on death worlds are aggressive but usually predictable, Ryan said, continuing his work under the shelter. The atmospheric data showed acid precipitation cycles every 8 to 12 hours. Seemed smart to design around it. By afternoon, a new threat emerged. Territorial predators Ryan had documented on the first day began fighting somewhere in the jungle. The sounds carried across the canopy like thunder made of rage. Trees crashed. Something screamed in a frequency that made the equipment vibrate. Rook's stress fractures deepened. Visibly, they're coming closer. Ryan paused his work to listen. Battle raged for another minute before the sounds began moving away from the camp, angling deeper into the jungles. Interior, they're not coming closer. They're moving toward each other. He resumed welding a connection point. 2 packs competing for hunting territory. They'll settle it away from here. How? Can you be certain? Hollis asked, his skin pale with fear. Because we're not part of their ecology, Ryan said. Patiently, we don't hunt their prey. We don't threaten their young. We're just strange, noisy things that smell wrong and stay in one place. Ignoring us takes less energy than investigating us. Sounds faded completely within 10 minutes, just as Ryan predicted. During a break for water and nutrition, Hollis approached Ryan with genuine curiosity replacing his fear. Tell me about Alaska, the amphibian said. You mentioned growing up there. Ryan settled onto a bench, grateful for the rest even if he didn't show fatigue. Like the others, Alaska is beautiful and trying to kill you simultaneously. Winters drop to -40, where breathing hurts and exposed skin freezes. In minutes, summers bring grizzly bears out of hibernation, hungry and territorial. The terrain includes active volcanoes, unstable glaciers, and forests so thick you can get lost 50 m from your house. That sounds horrible, Holly said. That sounds like home, Ryan corrected gently. You learn fast or you don't learn at all. Check your surroundings constantly. Respect wildlife, understand weather patterns, never assume safety, but don't live in fear either. Just stay aware. He gestured at Typhon 7 jungle. This planet uses different variables, but the principles are identical. Learn the rules and follow them. Afternoon brought seismic activity. The ground rolled in waves that knocked Hollis off his feet and sent tools sliding across the workshop floor. Nara grabbed a support rail, her antenna rigid with panic. Rook's crystalline structure sang with stress harmonics. Ryan had already braced the most critical equipment during construction. He moved through the shaking camp, securing loose items and checking the structural integrity of his builds. The earthquake lasted 45 seconds that felt like hours to the alien crew. When it stopped, Ryan examined the camp methodically. Some cracks in the eastern foundation. I'll reinforce that tonight, otherwise everything held. He returned to the engine core like nothing had happened. Earthquakes don't concern you, Nara asked weakly. Grew up in a seismic zone, Ryan said, resuming his welding. You build for it. Flexible foundations, reinforced joints, nothing too rigid. He completed the weld and inspected it. Earth taught me that rigid things break, flexible things survive. By evening, they had completed 40% of the repairs. The containment field generator sat fully disassembled, its components laid out for individual restoration. The primary conduits had been cleared and tested. The backup systems hummed with renewed life. Ryan prepared another meal while the others rested their gravity-exhausted bodies. The camp lights pushed back Typhon 7. Darkness again, creating an island of human engineering in an alien wilderness. 3 more days, Rook calculated, examining their progress. Maybe 4. We'll make 3, Ryan said confidently. Tomorrow I'll fabricate the replacement parts we need, day after we reassemble. Final day for testing and calibration. He handed out food portions. We're ahead of schedule. Nara accepted her meal with trembling hands, exhausted from Fighting gravity all day, I don't understand how you maintain this pace. The gravity alone should be crippling. Ryan considered his response while eating. Humans evolved carrying things, hunting prey over long distances, building shelters in hostile environments. Our bodies are designed for sustained effort under stress. He flexed his shoulders. This gravity is heavy, but it's not outside my operational range. Uncomfortable, sure. Impossible, no. The night sounds of Typhon 7 started their nightly chorus. By now, the crew recognized some of the calls. The deep bass notes belonged to the large herbivores. The clicking patterns came from insect swarms. The occasional roar marked territorial claims being made and answered. Inside Ryan's camp, surrounded by his careful engineering and quiet confidence, the nightmare world felt almost manageable, almost safe. The human sat watch first, as he had every night, his eyes scanning the darkness. While his crewmates slept, Ryan woke before the first sun cleared the horizon, which on Typhon 7 meant waking in near total darkness. Bioluminescent fungi provided scattered pinpoints of light through the jungle, painting everything in shades of blue and purple. He had learned to read these patterns over the past 3 days. When the fungi glowed brighter, predators were hunting nearby, their movement disturbing the growth networks. This morning the fungi were dim and peaceful. He left the sleeping aliens in the shelter and ventured into the jungle with just a scanner and sample containers. What had started as survival reconnaissance had evolved into genuine scientific curiosity. Typhon 7 wasn't just dangerous, it was intricate, layered, and operating according to rules that made perfect sense once you stopped being afraid long enough to observe them. The carnivorous plants that had seemed so threatening on day one revealed themselves as something far more interesting. Ryan watched as one of the massive flower-like structures opened its petals to release a swarm of insects. The insects weren't being eaten, they were being launched, sent out to pollinate other plants in exchange for shelter and nutrients. Symbiosis, Ryan murmured, recording the behavior. You're not carnivorous at all. You're a hive structure. The realization shifted everything. He spent the next hour mapping the plant network, discovering that the root systems formed a web of communication throughout the jungle. When one plant detected danger, the entire network responded. That was why the flora had pulled back from his controlled burns so uniformly. They were acting as a single, distributed organism. Hollies found him 2 hours later, crouched beside a cluster of the acid spitting serpents Ryan had documented earlier. The amphibian froze in terror, but Ryan raised a hand for silence. Without taking his eyes off the creatures, the serpents weren't hunting. They were arranged in a defensive circle around a clutch of eggs half buried in the warm soil. As Ryan watched, one serpent left the circle to hunt, and another immediately took its place. They were sharing guard duty, protecting the next generation through cooperation. Their parents, Ryan said softly, not monsters, just parents defending their young. Hollies approached slowly, his scientific training overcoming his fear. Together, they observed the serpents for another 20 minutes, noting behaviors that transformed terrifying predators into dedicated caregivers. The acid they spit was primarily used to mark territory and ward off egg thieves, not to hunt prey. How did you know it was safe to get this close? Hollies asked. As they walked back to camp, I didn't Ryan admitted, but I watched there. Behavior patterns, they don't waste. Energy on threats outside there. Defensive perimeter, as long as I didn't approach the eggs, I wasn't triggering their protective instincts, he showed. Holly's his scanner data, everything on this planet operates on energy. Efficiency, aggression is expensive. They only use it when necessary. Back at camp, Ryan shared his findings with the crew over breakfast. Nara listened with growing fascination as he described the plant networks, the serpent parenting behaviors, and the predator pack structures he had mapped. You're conducting xenobiology research, she said, her antenna quivering with interest in the middle of a survival situation. Ryan shrugged, understanding the ecosystem makes survival easier. The more I know about how things work here, the better I can predict problems and avoid conflicts. He pulled up his accumulated data. For instance, there's a massive storm system building about 2 days out. The local fauna is already responding to the pressure changes. How big? Rook asked, his attention sharpening. Big enough that the normal shelter won't equate, Ryan said calmly, but I've found something better. He led them into the jungle after breakfast, following paths he had marked over the previous days. The crew struggled with the terrain, but Ryan had chosen routes that minimized obstacles. 20 minutes of careful walking brought them to a grove of the massive trees he had harvested wood from. Earlier, the trees were enormous there, trunks wider than the Meridian's hull. But more importantly, their root systems formed natural cave networks carved out by the tree's growth over centuries. Ryan illuminated one of the larger openings with his light. Inside the cave stretched back into darkness, the walls formed by interwoven roots that had petrified into something stronger than concrete the space could easily hold. The crew and critical equipment. More remarkably, the cave was already occupied. A family group of the large herbivores Ryan had theorized about rested in the deeper sections. They looked like a cross between elephants and armored dinosaurs, their hides covered in overlapping plates. They paid no attention to the human and his crew standing at the entrance. They shelter here during storms, Ryan explained quietly. The root caves are structurally sound, waterproof, and the tree's ground lightning strikes through. Their root systems, safest place on the planet during severe weather. Near stared at the massive creatures, then at Ryan. You want us to shelter with them? They're not aggressive toward non-threats, Ryan said. Watch. He walked slowly into the cave, moving with deliberate calm. The nearest herbivore opened one massive eye, regarded him for 3 seconds, then closed it again and went back to sleep. Ryan approached within 10 m before stopping, respecting the creature's personal space. He returned to the entrance where his crew waited in stunned silence. Animals follow logic, he said simply. These creatures have survived millions of years of evolution on a death world. They know the safest places to shelter and the most efficient ways to conserve energy. If we're smart, we learn from them instead of fearing them. The storm arrived ahead of schedule, screaming out of the east with winds that bent the massive trees. Ryan had prepared thoroughly, moving critical equipment and supplies into the root cave system. Hours before the first drops fell, the crew huddled in their designated section, while rain hammered the jungle outside, with enough force to strip leaves from branches. Lightning turned the world white with stroboscopic intensity. Thunder followed, in waves that Ryan felt in his chest. Water poured across the landscape in sheets, filling gullies and creating instant rivers. The storm wasn't just weather, it was violence made atmospheric. Inside the cave, the herbivores slept peacefully, their centuries of genetic memory knew these caves would hold. Ryan sat near the entrance, watching the storm with the same calm observation he brought to everything on Typhon 7. Behind him, Nara approached quietly. "How are you not terrified?" she asked, sitting beside him. Ryan thought about the question while watching a lightning bolt strike one of the trees. The electrical charge ran harmlessly down through the root system, exactly as he had predicted. "I grew up with hurricanes in summer and blizzards in winter. My grandmother survived an earthquake that leveled half her city. My father worked in avalanche country." He glanced at her. "Fear is just information telling you to be careful. It's not a command to freeze." Another predator species entered the cave system, shaking water from scaled hides before settling in an cove across from the herbivores, natural enemies in normal times, but the storm enforced a temporary truce. Survival trumped hunger. "On my world we have one moon, predictable seasons, and gentle weather," Nara said quietly. "Our greatest accomplishment was reaching space without ever having to truly fight our own planet." She watched the storm rage outside. "I'm starting to understand why humans see challenges differently. You had to fight just to exist." "Not fight," Ryan corrected gently. "Adapt. Humans who fought against nature died. Humans who learned from it survived. We didn't conquer Earth, we learned to read it, respect it, and find our place within its systems." He gestured at the peaceful cave full of dangerous creatures, sheltering together, same as everything else that survives. The storm continued through the night and into the next day. The crew slept in shifts, always with Ryan keeping watch. He used the time to observe the other species in the cave, noting their behaviors and adding to his growing understanding of Typhon 7 ecology. When the storm finally broke, the jungle emerged transformed. New growth had already sprouted, the accelerated life cycle typical of death worlds, taking advantage of the nutrient-rich rainfall. The predator packs emerged from their shelters and resumed hunting. The plant networks pulsed with renewed vigor. Ryan led his crew back to their camp, which had survived the storm intact thanks to his preparation and design. They returned to their repair work with 2 days remaining before the engines would be ready, but something had changed in how they viewed the nightmare world around them. It was still deadly, still hostile, still operating by rules that favored the brutal efficiency of survival, but it wasn't malicious. It wasn't evil, it was just nature, following patterns billions of years old, and the human among them knew how to read those patterns like a language. The repairs had progressed to the final calibration phase when everything went wrong. Hollis worked at the diagnostic station, his webbed fingers dancing across the interface while sweat beaded on his amphibian skin. The containment field generator hummed with restored power, running through its startup sequence for the 3rd time that morning. Rook monitored energy flow patterns from his position near the engine core. Nara supervised from the shelter, coordinating the final checklist. Ryan hauled the last of the heavy components into place, his muscles burning from days of work and heavy gravity, but his pace never slowing. Field stability at 98%, Hollies announced, just need to finalize the secondary harmonic dampeners and were operational. He reached for a control node to make the adjustment. His hand slipped on the sweat-slicked interface. The wrong sequence activated. The sound that followed made every creature within a kilometer fall silent. It started as a high-pitched whine that climbed beyond hearing range into frequencies that vibrated teeth and bones. The equipment screamed in mechanical distress, but worse, far worse, was what happened in the jungle. The plant network lit up like a distress beacon. Every bioluminescent vein across a 100 meters pulsed in rapid sequence, flashing the same pattern over and over. Ryan recognized it instantly from his observation. Distress pheromones, call for help broadcast through chemical and light signals simultaneously. Shut it down, he said sharply. Now. Hollies fumbled with the controls, his hands shaking. The sound cut off, but the damage was done. The jungle remained lit up, plants screaming their chemical alarm into an ecosystem that had learned to respond to such calls with immediate and overwhelming force. Rook's crystalline structure resonated with harmonic stress. What did we trigger? Ryan was already at the sensor station, pulling up readings of movement in the surrounding jungle. What he saw made his stomach drop. Hive response. The plants use pheromone signals to call for protection when threatened. We just broadcast that signal across every frequency they use. Protection from what? Nara asked. Moving toward the entrance, the answer came in a sound like rain made of armor. Plates clicking together, insects. Thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands, they poured from the jungle. Canopy and undergrowth in a living carpet of chitinous bodies, each the size of a human fist, moving with coordinated precision toward the camp. Their bodies gleamed purple-black in the sunlight, and their mandibles clicked with sounds that overlapped into a continuous rattle. The territorial insects Ryan had observed and carefully avoided for 5 days now called to defend their plant symbionts from a threat that didn't exist. Back to the ship, Nara commanded, her voice tight with fear. Seal the airlock. We abandon the repairs until they disperse. No, Ryan said, his eyes fixed on the approaching swarm. His mind raced through everything he had learned about Typhon 7 ecosystem. They won't disperse. They'll investigate until they confirm the threat is gone. They'll tear apart our equipment, looking for whatever damaged their plant network. Then we fight, Rook said, reaching for a plasma cutter that could be weaponized. No, Ryan repeated, this time with absolute certainty. He was already stripping off his protective jacket, removing his gloves, leaving his arms bare. Everyone get to the shelter and seal it. Don't come out no matter what happens. Holly stared at him in horror. You can't go out there. Their stings penetrate most armor on bare skin. You'll die in minutes. Only if they perceive me as a threat, Ryan said calmly, though his heart hammered against his ribs. I've watched them for 5 days. I know their behavior patterns. Trust me, Ryan. I can't let you. Nara began. Captain, with respect, you don't have time to argue. The swarm was 50 m away and closing fast. Get to the shelter. That's an order from your survival specialist. The 3 aliens retreated to the sealed shelter, watching through the transparent panels as Ryan walked toward the swarm with nothing but the clothes On his back in a small bundle he had grabbed from supplies. The insects reached the perimeter of the camp and flowed over Ryan's motion. Sensors like a living flood. They covered the equipment, investigating every surface with chemical receptors in their antenna. Some began dismantling the atmospheric processors there. Mandibles designed to break down complex organic material. Ryan stood perfectly still 20 m from the swarm's leading edge. He controlled his breathing, slowing his heart rate. Through conscious effort, a meditation technique he had learned for dealing with grisly encounters. Predators track panic. They sensed fear through elevated heart rates and rapid breathing. He couldn't afford either. The swarm noticed him. A portion broke off from the main mass, flowing toward the humans standing alone in their territory. Ryan remained motionless, barely breathing as thousands of insects approached his position. He opened his bundle slowly, carefully. Inside were fruits he had collected from the jungle. Over the past 5 days, the same fruits he had watched these insects harvest for their plant symbionts, the same fruits that formed the foundation of the hive's nutrition cycle. Ryan knelt, moving with glacial slowness, and placed the fruits on the ground in front of him. Then he retreated 3 steps and stopped again. The swarm reached the offerings. Scouts investigated the fruits with chemical analysis while the main mass held position. Ryan could see their antenna waving, processing information, communicating through pheromones he couldn't detect but knew were flowing. The scouts approved the offering. They began carrying fruit pieces back toward the plant network, signaling acceptance. But the rest of the swarm remained focused on Ryan. He represented an unknown variable. Unknown meant potential threat. Threat meant elimination. Insects crawled onto his boots. Ryan didn't move. More climbed up his legs, their sharp feet finding purchase on his pants. Still he remained frozen, a statue in human form. They reached his hands, investigating his skin with antennae and mandibles. Inside the shelter, Nara watched with all her eyes wide. Holly's had turned gray again. Rook's stress fractures deepened with crystalline tension. The insects covered Ryan completely. They crawled across his arms, his chest, his neck. Several investigated his face, their antennae brushing his closed eyelids. One particularly large specimen settled on his forehead, its mandibles clicking softly against his skin. Ryan's mind recited facts to stay calm. Insects responded to chemical signals. Adrenaline changed human scent. Fear pheromones triggered aggression in most species. Remain calm. Breathe slowly. Heart rate down. No sudden movements. No fear. The investigation lasted 3 minutes. That felt like 3 hours. Then, as suddenly as they had come, the insects began retreating. The scouts had determined that Ryan was not the source of the distress signal. The offered fruits proved he understood the ecosystem's rules. He was strange, but not threatening, not prey, not predator. Just another organism following the patterns. The swarm flowed back into the jungle, carrying the fruits Ryan had provided. Within 5 minutes, the camp was clear, except for scattered kitten fragments and the damage to the equipment. Ryan remained still for another full minute, making certain the last insects had departed. Then very slowly he allowed himself to breathe normally again. His legs shook as adrenaline finally crashed through his system. He sat down hard, his hands trembling. The shelter door burst open and the crew rushed out. Nara reached him first, her antenna sweeping over him in desperate search for wounds. "I'm fine," Ryan managed, his voice not entirely steady. "Not stung, not bitten, fine." That was the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed, Holly said, his voice cracking. Ryan laughed, slightly hysterical with relief. "That makes two of us." He looked at the damaged equipment, his survival specialist mind already cataloging repairs needed. "We lost about 6 hours of work. The atmospheric processors need rebuilding, but the core system survived." "How did you know they wouldn't attack?" Rook asked. Ryan stood on shaking legs. "Accepting support from NRA, I didn't. No, I believed based on observation and pattern recognition there's a difference." He managed a weak smile. "Sometimes you have to trust that you've learned enough to make the right choice." "You could have died," Nara said quietly. "Yes," Ryan agreed, "but if I'd run, they would have destroyed our repairs and we'd be trapped here for weeks instead of hours. If we'd fought, they would have swarmed us all." He looked at the jungle where the insects had disappeared. Understanding was the only option that didn't guarantee failure, so I chose understanding. The crew worked through the rest of the day repairing the damage Holly's accident had caused, but they worked differently now, with deeper respect for both the nightmare world around them and the human who had learned to speak its language without words. The Meridians' engines hummed with restored life, their containment field stable and power flowing clean through repaired conduits. 6 days after the emergency landing that should have killed them all, the survey ship was ready to leave Typhon 7 behind. Ryan stood in the camp one final time, methodically dismantling everything he had built. The shelter came down sections, the material sorted into categories. Biological matter went into compost piles that the jungle would reclaim within hours. Metal components were cleaned of human contamination and stacked for recycling. The atmospheric processors, now repaired, were loaded back into the ship's cargo bay. Nero watched him work with questions she hadn't yet found words for. Holly's and Rook were inside the ship running final system checks and preparing for launch, but the captain remained outside, observing the human erase his presence from the nightmare world. "You're being very thorough," she said finally. Ryan didn't pause in his work, carefully scattering the cleared ground with native soil and seedlings he had collected. "Leave no trace," he said. "Simply basic wilderness protocol from Earth. You take only memories and leave only footprints, and even the footprints should fade. Why does it matter? We're leaving. We'll never return here." Ryan knelt to plant the last seedling, his hands gentle with the alien flora that had tried to kill him less than a week ago. "Because this is their home, not mine. I was a guest here. Guests don't trash their host's house." He stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "Besides, the ecosystem was balanced before we crashed. It deserves to return to balance after we leave." He deactivated the motion sensors one by one, collecting them carefully. As each sensor went offline, the boundary markers that had kept predators at bay disappeared. The jungle would reclaim this space within days, erasing all evidence that humans had ever stood here, defying a death world's fury. Nara's antenna quivered with an emotion she was still learning to recognize. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." Ryan paused, meeting her compound gaze. Of course, why aren't you afraid? She gestured at the jungle where morning light painted the canopy in shades of purple and gold, where creatures that could shred steel hunted through undergrowth, where every plant and animal operated according to rules written in survival and violence of death worlds of everything that should terrify any rational being. Ryan was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer with the same careful thought he brought to everything. I didn't say I wasn't afraid, he said finally. I was terrified. When the swarm covered me, I'm nervous. Every time I step into unknown jungle. Fear is information, Captain. It tells you to be careful, to pay attention to. Respect what you're dealing with. He walked toward the jungle's edge and Nara followed. He stopped where the cleared camp met wild growth, 1 foot in each world, but Earth taught humanity something that maybe other species didn't need to learn. Nature isn't malicious, it's not evil, it's not trying to hurt you specifically. He touched a nearby plant, one of the ones he had identified as part of the communication network. Everything here is just trying to survive. The predators hunt because they're hungry. The plants defend because they're vulnerable. The insects swarm because they're protecting their symbiotes. That doesn't make them less dangerous, Nara pointed out. No, Ryan agreed, but it makes them predictable, understandable. You can't negotiate with malice, but you can work within the boundaries of survival instinct. He turned to face her fully. Humans survived on Earth not because we were the strongest or the fastest or the most venomous. We survived because we learned to read patterns, to understand behavior, to find our place in the ecosystem instead of fighting against it. Nara thought about the past 6 days. The camp built from observation and adaptation, the storm shelter chosen by following animal wisdom, the insect swarm pacified through respect and offerings rather than weapons. Every challenge met with understanding instead of force. Your species designation puzzles the Federation, she said quietly. Earth scores as a death world, yet humans are classified as social and cooperative. Most death world species are solitary, apex predators. How did your people evolve differently? Ryan smiled, the expression carrying sadness and pride in equal measure. Because Earth doesn't have one apex predator, it has thousands across every biome and ecological niche. Humanity survived by cooperating with each other and learning from the world around us. We domesticated wolves into dogs by understanding pack behavior. We learned agriculture by observing how plants grow. We built civilization by sharing knowledge across generations. He gestured at Typhon 7 jungle. This world is rated higher than Earth on the death world scale, but only barely. Everything I encountered here has an Earth equivalent. I already knew how to handle. The acid rain is like battery acid spills in industrial zones. The predator packs behave like wolves or lions. The seismic activity is just earthquake protocol. The insects follow the same colonial patterns as Earth's bees and ants. You're saying Earth prepared you for this? Nara said. Earth prepared humanity for anything, Ryan corrected gently. 4 billion years of evolution in conditions that ranged from frozen tundra to volcanic hellscapes to deep ocean trenches to arid deserts. Every environment that can support life, Earth has it. Every predator strategy that Works, something on Earth uses it. Every survival adaptation that functions. Earth's creatures have tried it. He picked up his last piece of equipment, a simple scanner that had cataloged Typhon 7 wonders when humans finally reached space and discovered the Federation's classification system. We were confused. Why you all seemed so terrified of death. Worlds, then we realized that most species evolved on garden worlds, places with gentle weather and predictable seasons and ecosystems that didn't try to kill you for existing. And you pity us for that. There was no accusation in Nara's voice, just curiosity. No, Ryan said firmly, I admire you. Your species reached space through innovation and cooperation without the constant pressure of survival driving you. You built beautiful civilizations without needing them as shelter from hostile nature. He smiled again, but I don't envy you either. Earth made humanity adaptable in ways that garden world species didn't need to be. We see challenges where you see impossibilities. We see patterns where you see chaos. They walked back toward the meridian together, leaving the camp's footprint already fading behind them. Inside the ship, Hollis and Rook waited at their stations. The aliens looked different than they had 6 days ago, less afraid, more thoughtful. As Ryan strapped into his seat for launch, Nara settled into the captain's chair and pulled up her logs. She had been documenting their survival in careful detail. But now she added something new, a recommendation that would filter through Federation channels and change how entire civilizations viewed emergency protocols. When faced with death world emergency landings, consult human crew members before implementing standard evacuation procedures. Human analysis of hostile environments may identify survival opportunities that standard protocols classify as impossible. The Meridian lifted off from Typhon 7 smoothly, engines purring with restored health through the viewports. The nightmare world receded into the purple sky, but it looked different to the 3 aliens who had survived it, less like a vision of hell and more like a functioning ecosystem they simply hadn't known how to read. Ryan took one last look at the planet that had tested every skill Earth had given him, the jungle where he had walked among predators, the caves where he had sheltered beside creatures that could have crushed him, the clearing where thousands of insects had investigated his offering and chosen peace over violence. Thank you, he said quietly, too soft for the others to hear, a prayer of gratitude to a world that had allowed him to be a guest rather than demanding he be a conqueror. As they entered orbit and prepared for the jump to Federation space, Hollis turned from his station with data streaming across his displays. I've been reclassifying the information we gathered, he said, based on Ryan's observations. Typhon 7 ecosystem shows remarkable organization. The plant networks, the predator territories, the symbiotic relationships between species. It's not chaos at all. No, Ryan agreed. It never was. We just didn't know the language. Rook's crystalline voice carried new harmonics, something like wonder. I have logged over 40 distinct survival strategies we observed. Each one contradicts standard Federation emergency protocols. Each one worked perfectly because it respected the planetary ecology rather than fighting against it. Nara looked at her human crew member, this survivor of a death world who had taught her crew to dance with nightmares instead of fleeing from Then, will you write a report on your methods for other survey teams? Ryan considered this. I can write what I did, but understanding requires experience. It's not a checklist you can follow, it's a mindset. He thought about how to explain it. Humans don't survive death worlds by being brave or strong or clever, though those help. We survive by being humble enough to learn from nature. Instead of assuming we know better, then teach us humility, Nero said simply. Because the galaxy is full of worlds, like Typhon 7, and until now we've classified them all as uninhabitable. But you've shown us they're not nightmares, they're just places we didn't yet know how to understand. The Meridian jumped to faster than light travel, carrying its crew home to Federation space. Behind them, Typhon 7 continued its eternal cycles of rain and sun, predator and prey, growth and decay, a death world by classification, a home by nature, a teacher to those wise enough to listen, and in the cleared space where a human had camped for 6 days, the jungle reclaimed its territory. Seedlings Ryan had planted took root, the plant networks reconnected, predators resumed their territories. Within a week, no evidence remained that anything unusual had occurred, except for the stories that 3 aliens would tell of the human who asked where to set up camp on a nightmare world, then proceeded to build home in hell with nothing but observation, respect, and the lessons that Earth had spent 4 billion years teaching her children.